I'm Dr. Dave Janda. Welcome back to the Insider Insight Show. I am honored to have with me someone who is an incredible American hero and the true epitome of being a freedom fighter. My dad used to say, you know the real winners in life. You know the real people who have succeeded in life, and those that can be handed lemons, truckloads of them, and be able to make lemonade. I have for us today, for our listeners and our viewers, Captain Charlie Plum, who is probably the number one lemonade maker on the planet. And I say that for the following. Let me give you a little background on Charlie. After graduating from the Naval Academy, Captain Plum completed naval flight training and reported to Miramar Naval Air Station in San Diego, where he flew the first adversarial flights in the development of what would be called the Navy Fighter Weapons School, currently known as Top Gun. The next year, Captain Plum's squadron, the Aardvarks, launched on the aircraft carrier USS Kitty Hawk with Fighter Squadron 114 to fly the Navy's hottest plane, the F-4 Phantom jet, codenamed Plumber. Charlie flew 74 successful combat missions over North Vietnam and made over 100 carrier landings. On his 75th mission, just 5 days before the end of his tour of duty, Charlie was shot down over Hanoi, taken prisoner, tortured, and spent the next 2,103 days in North Vietnamese prison of war camps. His first prison cell was a mere 8 feet by 8 feet wide. And during his nearly 6 years of captivity, Charlie distinguished himself as a pro in underground communications. He was a great inspiration to all other POWs and served as chaplain for 2 years. Following Charlie's repatriation, Charlie continued his Navy flying career in reserve squadrons, where he flew the A-4 Skyhawks, A-7 Corsairs, and the FA-18 Hornet. His last two commands as a naval reservist were on the aircraft carrier Coral Sea and a fighter air wing in California. He retired from the United States Navy with a rank of captain after 31 years of service. And since his return home, Charlie has captivated more than 5,000 audiences in almost every industry around the world with stories that parallel his POW experience with the challenges of everyday life. To this day, Captain Plum continues to fly left-seated every opportunity he can get. And his most treasured plane he owns and flies is a World War II PT-19 open cockpit antique, which is currently on loan to the Palm Springs, California. It is my honor to welcome to our platform Captain Charlie Plum. Captain, welcome to the Insider Insight Show.
Thank you very much, Doctor. A pleasure to be with you.
Charlie, I want to focus our conversation today on beating adversity, beating evil. The reason why I want to do that, Charlie, is that, as I mentioned in your introduction, you spent 2,103 days in captivity in enemy hands. You were abused, you were tortured, psychologically, physically. And Charlie, obviously it changes you forever, but you just didn't survive. You turned that horrendous experience into something very positive for many, many thousands of people who have come to know you and hear your presentations. Charlie, many people in our country right now feel as though they're under a different type of captivity than you were, but there are some similar sides. They feel as though their government is treating them as though they are a prisoner of war by stripping them of their freedoms and their liberties, and some people believe their future and their lives, both from a psychological standpoint and a physical standpoint. Charlie, as I mentioned in your introduction, you were 5 days away from coming home when you got shot down. Take us through the day you were shot down and the days that followed.
Surely. It started early in the morning. I got a call in my stateroom on the Kitty Hawk aircraft carrier at about 3 a.m. Announcing it was going to be a big strike. We called it an alpha strike. It was about the biggest thing you could do. We had three aircraft carriers and 5 Air Force bases, and every airplane that we could get in the sky, and attacking many targets in North Vietnam. I was the schedules officer for my squadron, and so I had to assign a crews with airplanes. So we briefed for the mission, put on our flight gear. I took off. It was launched from the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk in an F-4 Phantom jet with my co-pilot in the back seat. We rendezvoused at about 20,000 feet, took on some extra fuel, and pointed the airplane towards the beach. I'll never forget that day, 19th of May in 1967, looking from horizon to horizon, I could see airplanes. It was a big deal. And I felt very happy for several reasons. I felt very proud to be able to do what I was doing. I was 24 years old and flying this multi-gazillion-dollar airplane, high-altitude supersonic interceptor. We could go twice the speed of sound. And I felt really good about what we were doing in Vietnam. I felt like we were fighting for their freedom, and ideally fighting for the freedom of folks around the world. You know, we were standing up for a cause that we believed in, and I was proud to be a part of that. Just short of the target, the airplane was hit by a surface-to-air missile. It exploded to some 12,000 pounds of jet fuel I had on board and sent that airplane topsy-turvy into wind towards the rice paddy below. I ejected, my backseater ejected, and we came floating down over enemy territory. Made a 90-second descent from Top Gun King of the Sky to POW Scum of the Earth. So that's how it all began.
So you hit the ground. Were you immediately taken captive?
I was. They were actually shooting at me in the parachute. So I didn't think that was very fair. They just knocked down this gazillion-dollar airplane. Now they're shooting at the pilot. But I landed in a rice paddy, about waist deep in the mud of a rice paddy. And all these folks that have been shooting at me have, surrounded me immediately. I was hauled into the prison camp, the Hanoi Hilton, where I was tortured for 2 days for political propaganda and military information, and tossed into the little 8-foot by 8-foot prison cell, which you describe in your introduction. Now, what I found was the restriction was not the 8 feet between the walls. It turned out to be the 8 inches between my ears. I was in a mental box, and I think my first answer to your question of how do we as Americans sustain and defend and even emerge prosperous through the imprisonment, if you will, by our government and our society and our media, is to believe that the decision is within the 8 inches between your ears, that we all still have power, the power of choice, that regardless of what's going on around us, we can still choose our attitude and the direction that we want to go through the melees that's being imposed upon us. And that's pretty much what I found out in the prison camp, and I think why and I'm not the only one. You know, there were 591 of us came home, and they thought we'd be in baskets. They thought we'd be vegetables. They had our families briefed to institutionalize us the rest of our lives. So from 591 men, we have produced 17 generals, 7 admirals, most of us retired as senior grade military officers. We have 2 ambassadors from our number. We have a bunch of congressmen, 2 United States senators, a vice presidential candidate, and a presidential candidate from 591 men. And they're telling us today we're healthier mentally and physically than the guys who didn't get shot down and captured. So one of my mantras is adversity is a horrible thing to waste. That you can actually take the lemons, as you mentioned, and thanks for calling me a lemonade maker. I've never been called that before. But I suppose that I suppose it is true. There's that you can take the adversities of life and turn them around to advantages of life, and I'm a big believer of that.
Charlie, you mentioned the first 2 days you were in captivity, you were tortured. Can you give us a? Can you go? I don't want to bring back obviously horrible memories, but can you tell us what that torture entailed?
Sure, we called it the main torture was called the rope trick. We called it the rope trick. It was manacles put on your wrists behind your back, and then they wrapped a rope around your elbows and drew your elbows together behind your back. Try that out. It's pretty tough to do. Mm-hmm. Then they put shackles on your ankles, ran a bar through those shackles, and then ran another rope from your ankles up over your shoulder and back down to your wrists. And then they tightened up that rope. So the end result was your feet are right up in your face. Your elbows now are tied together. Your shoulders are out of joint. They actually rotate. I remember looking up, seeing my wrists backwards above my head. Your shoulders are rotated that far. Then they take another rope and wrap it around the rope that's holding you in this pretzel position, and run that rope over a hook in the ceiling and hoist you up on above the floor. So that's that. They've been using this for 1,000 years, and the beauty of this torture technique is that you never pass out. You just lay there in pain. So, and it worked. I really wanted to, and I thought I could abide by what we call our code of conduct in the military. If you're captured, you are obliged to give only name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And I flew the skies of Vietnam thinking I was tough enough, that I would never give in and tell them anything more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And the torture was too great. And after that 2 days and tossed in this little 8-foot by 8-foot cell, I felt guilty of giving more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. I thought, how can I ever go back to my country and admit to my family, to my fellow fighter pilots, that I had been so weak, that I had that failed in my mission. And so I was pacing the floor in misery and pain and guilt and shame, and I heard a cricket in the far corner of my prison cell. Walked over to investigate. It wasn't a cricket. It was a wire coming through a hole in the hole in the base of the corner of my cell. I tugged on the wire. It tugged back. I tugged again. It disappeared. The wire came back about an hour later with a note wrapped around the end of it with a code where we could represent letters of the alphabet by numbers of tugs. And I started a very slow, cumbersome communication with the guy on the other end of the wire. And after we, exchanged our names and ranks and that kind of thing, I found it was Bob Shoemaker, been there for 2 years when I showed up. It's the number 2 POW shot down. And I said, Bob, I have a confession to make to you. And when I tell you what I did, you might not want to communicate with me anymore. And if our roles were reversed, I probably wouldn't want to communicate with you. He said, what'd you do, Charlie? I said, I broke. I broke. The torture was too great, and I gave more than name, rank, serial number, date of birth. And Bob said, hell, everybody broke. He said, there's not a man in this prison camp who is as strong as he wanted to be. So pull up your big boy pants. We got a war to fight. And that really turned it around for me.
Now, Charlie, how often would you be tortured?
About every 6 months, they would come up with some kind of a reason to run back through the camp. Usually it was an escape attempt or a communication violation. We were not supposed to communicate with anybody else. And so they would come back, and what they called punishment turned out to be punishment until you signed a confession or until you made a tape to the anti-war element in the States. And so it was truly torturing for a purpose.
Charlie, tell us, I mentioned in your introduction, you were essentially became a communication specialist as a POW. What, other than the wire and the tugs, how were the POWs, your fellow POWs, communicating with each other? What type of communication system did you set up?
This first note that I got with the code on it, I'll describe it to you. It's a 5x5 matrix of the alphabet, 5 lines, 5 rows. A, B, C, D, E across the top, F, G, H, I, J. We left out K, substituted C for a K, just to make it come out 5x5. So numbers down the side and across the top, if you can imagine this box, that any letter would be represented by 2 numbers, the number of the line, then the number of the row. So A, 1, first line, first row, would be 1 tug, 1 more tug, or 1 tap, 1 more tap. Z, 5th line, 5th row. You think your email is cumbersome. Try this for 6 years. So we use that, what we call tap code, in many forms. For instance, if a guy was allowed outside to chop wood for the fire, he could chop in this code. Chop, 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 chop. So, and it was like a radio station because the entire camp could hear him chopping in this code. We also would designate letters of the alphabet or numbers in this tap code by coughs, sneezes, spits, or wheezes. When we found out that the enemy, most of them had tuberculosis, and they were coughing and grunting and spitting, and we couldn't whisper a word outside ourselves, but we could go around coughing and spitting all day. So we devised this code. And so you wake up in the morning and hear the guys in the cell next door go, and that means, good morning, how are you? We were moved to a camp when they found out that we were pretty creative with our codes. Huh. And moved us to a new camp that they had designed specifically for us that had double walls. So you couldn't tap on one wall and hear in the other wall. Mm-hmm. And it had vent holes. There were never any windows in these cells, but they had a vent hole usually at 7 or 8 feet above the floor. And it was usually maybe 12, 14 inches by 6 or 8 inches. And you could get up into the vent hole and see. But in this particular camp, they designed it so that no vent hole looked into any other vent hole. And so we made mirrors. I can tell you how to make a mirror. If you want to make a mirror, you rub on a board for about 3 months and get it real smooth. And you put earwax on the board, and it actually becomes quite shiny. Huh. And so we would pass a mirror outside this vent hole and look into a mirror another guy was putting outside his vent hole, and you could actually you could communicate with each other through this tap code.
Charlie, how often were you moved?
A couple of times a year, and we never really understood that. But I was in 6 different prison camps, and we kind of felt like they were trying to destroy any fraternization between the POWs and the guards. Huh. And they were always trying to break down our system of communication and our rank structure. Because, I mean, one of the really good parts of being a POW is that you knew exactly who was the boss all the time. The first thing we did was compare dates of rank with the other prisoners. And so one guy was always in charge. He was always going to be he was always going to be the guy making the decisions, and we knew that. Mm-hmm. And so it worked out.
And Charlie, when you would be moved, would you be moved in mass, all of you together, or would they just take a couple guys, move them, and a couple guys move them, or how did that movement take place?
Both ways. Sometimes it was just one or two guys, and sometimes it was 100. And it was usually they'd come in and bind your arms behind your back with a gag and a blindfold, and toss you in the back of a pickup truck. And sometimes you were in that pickup truck with 15 or 20 other guys. You were bound but in one particular case, as a matter of fact, this first guy, Bob Shoemaker, sent me several things, patriotic quotes and Bible verses and poems and these kinds of things. That when we communicate, it's all we had to do. And he said, when he always sign off, "Keep the faith, baby." and so in this truck, I was hauled out of there, leaving Shoemaker in that particular camp. This truck pressed against all these other guys. I couldn't talk to them. I was gagged, couldn't see them, couldn't move a muscle in my body except my big toe. I got my big toe on another guy, and I started to tap out in that tap code. What Shoemaker had taught me: keep the faith, baby. And this guy squirmed around that he could pass it to two guys. They passed it to four guys. The message: keep the faith, baby, came back to me 11 times before dawn on various parts of my body. So,
rations, Charlie. What type of food rations were you given on a daily basis?
2 bowls of rice a day, and one about 10 o'clock in the morning and one about 2 in the afternoon. And sometimes some broth. I didn't have a piece of meat I didn't have to meat in the coffee cup for a year. I didn't. So there was very little. But rice is a pretty perfect food actually. Mm-hmm. And so while I was pretty skinny, we stayed pretty healthy.
And water? How much access to water do you have other than the broth?
That was a big problem because we got a little liter jug of water every day, and in the summertime that wasn't enough. It got pretty hot in those prison cells, so we were dehydrated a lot of the time.
What was your worst day of captivity?
Well, the torture, of course, was pretty painful physically. But as the war dragged on and on and on and on, and we heard that the peace talks were started, mm-hmm. and the bombings was stopped to try to, convince the enemy that we were serious about the peace talks. And so when the bombing, see, the Hanoi Hilton, of course, was in downtown Hanoi, and even in the outlying camps, we could hear American airplanes, and so we knew the war was still on until the peace talks started. And then it was no air raids, no American airplanes, and month after month after month, nothing happened, and we began to think we might have been forgotten over mm-hmm. there. Mm-hmm. And of course, the enemy was telling us that too, that our wives had divorced us and we were all forgotten, and if we ever got home, we'd be tried for war crimes. And of course, they were telling us all of this propaganda. We didn't believe it, but it was sort of gnawing in the back of our minds that we had actually been forgotten.
Your captors, the guards.
Right.
Tell us about them.
Well, they were pretty mean guys. They, you don't send your best troops to guard prisoners, and so these were they were young guys for the most part and small. Most of the guards were 5 feet tall, and we named them. It was one of the most famous ones we called AB. That stood for afterbirth. We figured his mom kept afterbirth, threw away the baby. He was one of the main ones. So, but they were very controlled. It was kind of interesting that the these guards could be turned on and off like a light switch. They would be mean one day, and maybe the next day they would be more gentle with us. And it usually tended to be how the war was going. When the war was going bad for them, the guards would be tougher. And if they thought they were winning the war, then the guards were somewhat lenient.
So, Charlie, as you went through these 2,103 days, what kept you going? I mean, two bowls of rice, 1 liter of water. You can't talk to anybody other than the communication systems you've set up. You're getting tortured and abused. You're concerned that maybe you were forgotten for months on end when the peace talks were ongoing, the bombing stopped, but nothing was moving forward. Charlie, what kept you going?
I think, several things. A positive attitude, truly believing that someday we would be free. And then, you talk a lot about freedom. And one of the common thoughts in our own minds and in all the POWs was, someday we're going to be free. These guards are going to have to stay here in this communistic society. We got it better off than they do. And so that was uplifting. I'm a man of faith, and I think a solid foundation in faith was very important to me. Another thing that was very meaningful was forgiveness. And within the first 3 or 4 months of that prison situation, I decided that I had to forgive. The guards were torturing me. The camp commander that instructed them to do that, I had to forgive the mechanic who put the airplane together and myself for being so weak. And of course, forgiveness is a great Christian principle, but oh, by the way, it's a survival principle as well. That one of the quotes that Shoemaker passed me on that wire was this: "Acid does more harm in the vessel it's stored than on the subject it's poured." What that meant to me was, yes, I can have all this hate and vitriol and anger in my heart, but that's not hurting the enemy. It's hurting me. Mm-hmm. And it sort of made a commitment to myself at that point. I said, I think I'm going to live through this, but if I don't, they got to work at it. I'm not going to kill myself just by this hate within me. They're going to have to drag me out here feet first, but they're going to have to do it, and I'm not going to kill myself.
Charlie, and those that didn't make it, was there a common denominator in those that did not make it home?
That's a really good question, and I'm not sure that I can answer it. We found out that the guys who had difficult childhoods, who had who had been in fist fights and were more aggressive, were the guys that could take the lumps more. Mm-hmm. It was like the city boys and the country boys, the guys that had worked as a laborer, had taken some knocks, had been knocked down and gotten back up, were the guys that seemed to survive better than the fellows who were coddled in early life and was never exposed to any adversity.
Charlie, when you look back at the situation, this horrible 2,103 days, what did you learn the most about yourself during your captivity?
Well, I think I learned that I can control my emotions and through it can control my destiny. Mm-hmm. I think that, of course, as a young naval officer, I was there answering the call, doing what my seniors told me to do, and that was good. I was proud to do that. But oh, by the way, I think through the prison situation, I found out that I am the master of my fate. I'm the captain of my soul, and that meant a lot to me once I figured out that that I was in charge of me, and that the success or failure was going to be dependent on the choices that I made about my life, and not what was happening around me.
Tell us about the day you found out you were going to be released and when you were released. Tell us about that.
They tried to trick us many times. You want to go home? Sure. Sign this confession and we'll send you home. And of course, it was all just their attempt at propaganda and extracting things from us. And so so we wondered what it would be, how we would find out. Well, the first thing the first indicator was they brought in a sheet of wrapping paper, put it on the dirt floor, and told us to put our foot on it, of course. And then they traced with a pencil around our feet. We're going to get shoes. They're going to make shoes for us. Of course, we hadn't seen a shoe for 6 years. And so that was really the first indication. Then the food got better. And they gave us little cans of tuna. Oh. And yeah, things are really looking up. This was in like the last week or so, or maybe the last 2 or 3 weeks. And then the camp commander hauled us all outside our cells, which is very unusual, into the prison yard, and read the peace treaty was signed. So we still weren't really sure we were going home, but that was sort of the indication. They tried to treat us better. They allowed us outside to get some color in our faces, and they fed us better food. And then while we were all outside, they brought in an entertainer, a Vietnamese woman who was going to sing to us. So she got on a stage in front of probably 100 American POWs, and our senior officer told us to turn our back on this gal, that it was all propaganda. And of course, they were taking the movies of all of this. And so he thought it would be at our best interest to ignore this lady. And I turned and looked, and she was crying because she'd been rejected by all of us. And I felt kind of sorry for the gal. I mean, she was just trying to
She was doing her gig.
Doing her gig.
There for a minute, when you said an entertainer was coming out, I thought you were going to say they rolled Jane Fonda out in front of you guys.
Well, Jane did come over. There's an interesting, another interesting comment I will make on Jane Fonda, because I get a lot of people, especially veterans, who hate Jane Fonda, and want me to hate Jane Fonda. And I don't hate Jane Fonda. I don't go to her movies. I don't support her much. But there's a lot of misinformation on the internet, as we all know. And Jane Fonda is one of them. You Google Jane Fonda and Vietnam War, and it'll tell you that she got some POWs killed over there by exposing some of the communication we were doing. But that's not true. In fact, our POW website sort of contradicts all that, because we are truth seekers to begin with, and while we certainly didn't appreciate her coming over there and sitting in their in their anti-aircraft guns and wearing their helmets and promoting this anti-war, we felt like ideally that we were in uniform to defend her right to dissent, and we didn't see that in the communist country. And we were, somewhat proud to fight for the freedom of speech. So we, as a group, I think we've all forgiven Jane for what she did. We think it was just kind of her attempt at getting publicity. And so
Charlie, years after you came home, You ended up going back, didn't you?
I did. Yeah.
And you met with your captors, correct? The commander?
I did.
Oh, Charlie, you're a much bigger man than I ever would be.
You know,
Tell us about this.
Actually, they had invited me to come back over there. It was the the head of the history department, University of Hanoi, wanted me to come over, and for 4 or 5 years, I told him no. I really wasn't all that interested, and been there, done that. So
Yeah, I got
he
the
said,
T-shirt.
"Well, how about bringing your family over, and we'll give you a free vacation?" Okay, we'll do that. So I took my wife and 3 of our 4 kids to Vietnam. Now, and the kids were teenagers, I guess, late teens, and of course they knew my story very well, and they kind of assumed, and I think the media assumed that I would punch this guy out.
Yeah.
But back to forgiveness, I'd forgiven him a long time ago.
Right.
And he was fighting for his country, I was fighting for mine. So I went to see this guy. We called him the Rat. He was a rat. He looked like a rat. It was really interesting because they had told me that he was in his late 80s and at the end of his runway, and I kind of assumed he might want to apologize.
Right. Yeah.
Oh
no.
Oh no.
He didn't do it. He didn't do a thing to you guys, did he, Charlie? Right?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
He really surprised me because the first thing he wanted to do was to hug me.
Oh.
Now, first of all, that's not exactly an Asian
no.
kind of thing to do.
Right.
And then he stepped back and he said, "I was your warden from 1968 to 1972, and I've got to tell you that my finest achievement was to keep you healthy and happy while you were here."
Okay, yeah. So he didn't know that the guards were stringing you guys up with the rope and the hooks and no.
Now see, that's a possibility because I never saw him while I was being tortured. But I don't believe it. I think it came up from the top.
Right.
I think primarily he knew that if he admitted torturing, that he might be sued for war crimes.
Yeah.
And because they signed the Geneva Convention and on prisoners of war, and he wasn't abiding by it. So, but and then he came out with this homemade beer in a Pepsi bottle.
You sure it was beer?
No, it was pretty good beer.
Oh, okay, all right. I just wondered. Now, Charlie, when he hit you with this, I took such great care of you, my greatest achievement. Charlie, were your wife and kids there?
No.
Good. I was, yeah. So they were probably more apt to go off than you were on that. So what did you say to him when he hit you with that line?
I talked to this guy for like 45 minutes and said, why, how about these scars? How about the fact that I have only one testicle when I came home? I had 2 when I went. How did all that happen? Oh, he would say, sometimes we had to discipline you when you didn't follow the camp regulations. Of course, some of the camp regulations was tell every military secret and so if you don't do that, then they discipline you. Yeah. And so that was kind of his take. It was kind of a word play, whether it was discipline or torture. But he never ever admitted harming an American.
The old war crimes issue.
Yep.
So did you? So your former commandant or warden, as he called himself, any of the guards?
I didn't meet any of the guards while I was here. I met one of the fun things I did was to talk to the fighter pilots that I'd been in dogfights with. And
interesting.
It really was. We laid out an aviation chart and tried to figure out who was here and who got the best of whom and all this stuff. And again, these guys were just regular like we are just knuckle dragging, nose picking fighter pilots. They were just fighting for their country like we were. But it was really interesting to meet these guys who had fought against.
So the benevolent warden had sent somebody in to fit you guys up with shoes, give you some tuna, bring I don't know, the Ariana Grande of North Vietnam to entertain you. You guys turn your backs. So then, Charlie, when you're leaving, now you're got a little sun, little better food for a week or two, treated a little better, got shoes. Okay, now what? Now it's time. Now they just said, okay, here we go. Everybody together and to the airport. Or what happened?
That's pretty much it. They gave us a pair of trousers with a zipper.
Oh.
Hadn't seen a zipper in 6 years. That was pretty cool.
Yeah.
And marched us out. Well, actually, we marched. Our senior, the senior guy, called cadence as we marched to the bus. Up 2, 3, 4, got on the bus, over the dike, and down to the GLM airport. We'd seen that airport from the air, of course, many times with enemy airplanes. This time it's got a U.S. Air Force C-141 cargo jet ready to wing us away to freedom. And so even after we'd seen the airplane, nobody cried, nobody cheered, nobody hugged and kissed anyone else. They had several tables there on the tarmac with American officers on one side and the Vietnamese officers on the other, and they're checking us out. There actually was kind of a demarcation line right there, and you stepped across the line, then you were in American hands. And so and then we got on this C-141, and 90 minutes later, I was in Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines. So
now you're on the plane,
right?
When did it hit you that actually this is happening?
It wasn't really until we got over the coast, feet wet, we called it, because we knew that they still own terra firma, but we still own the ocean. Mm-hmm. And once we got the wheels in the well and over the ocean, and we started hugging and kissing the Air Force nurses.
Good assignment for them. So you get there. Now you're at Clark.
Yep.
Are your families there, or are they back stateside?
No, they're all stateside. It was really interesting because I think they didn't know what we were going to be like.
Right, because they said they told your family, see, these guys are going to come back and they're going to be vegetables.
Yep, that's what they thought. Yeah. And so the first we went to Clark, got off the airplanes and to the hospital, and the first guy to interview was a psychiatrist.
Oh, great!
And he
probably could have helped him out.
Yeah, he was really helpful.
Yeah. Right.
He let me make a phone call to my wife. Well, she was not there. I called my parents in Kansas, and my mom said, "I'd give 10 years of my life if I didn't have to tell you this, but your wife hung on for 5 years, and just 3 months ago, she filed for divorce.
Oh.
She's engaged to another guy." Well, that was a real gut punch.
Oh.
And I'm standing there in front of the psychiatrist, okay? And the psychiatrist said, this terrible news, and you don't seem to be too upset about this news. I said, well, I'm really disappointed, but, I just got set free, and it's a pretty happy day. It's, tough to piss me off. But he said to me, you need to show some anger. You need to go back to your hospital room, kick down the door, tear up your pillows, yell and scream if you need to, because you have the right to be bitter. And I said, Doc, I have the right to have diarrhea. But I choose not to be bitter. And he said to me, he said, the longer you wait to show some physical and emotional backlash to all of this, the longer you wait, the more serious it's going to be when you finally have that mental breakdown. So that was 50 years ago, and I'm still waiting for the breakdown. So, so the dietitians also had us all figured out. They decided we probably couldn't digest any.
Right.
So the first meals that they served us was Gerber baby food, mashed up rice.
Oh, lucky
Just
man.
like-
Just
yeah,
like back at the Stalag.
Exactly.
The
So,
gulag.
I went through the line. What do you want? Well, I want a big greasy cheeseburger and a beer.
Sorry, you get strained carrots with rice.
Yep.
So then, Charlie, then you head back stateside.
Yes. Now
Your parents meet you, or how?
we spent 2 days at Clark, and one of the things that they had sent military tailors there to tailor uniforms for us, which is really pretty cool.
Uh-huh.
And so in 2 days we were outfitted. Of course, we were skinnier than, we couldn't wear our regular uniforms. So they sewed all these uniforms together, sent us back. So I landed in Chicago and went to the hospital there, and that's where my mom and dad and sister, 2 brothers, were there to meet me.
Did they take you to Great Lakes?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I grew up in Chicago, so yeah.
I my home address is in Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
and so Great Lakes was the closest naval hospital.
Right.
And so, yeah, that's where I was, at Great Lakes.
When you saw your parents, one of the greatest moments of your life?
Yes, it certainly was. Now, when I left the States at 23, my mom had a full head of very dark brunette hair. When I came home at age 30, her hair had gone completely gray, and I really felt badly about that. A decision I had made at age 17 had affected her so deeply, and I apologized to her, I suppose, every month for the rest of her life that I'd caused her so much pain. And of course, her response, you got to know, my mother was Mother Teresa. She was a wonderful lady.
Right.
She would say, no, I would never have tried to talk you out of that. You wanted to fight for your country. You wanted to serve. I would never have ever tried to keep you away from the military. She said, I respected your decision, and I prayed a lot for you, and I'm glad you're home. So that was my mom. But I'm from a musical family. My dad was in a band, and we played and sang things together, and so we had a little hootenanny on the 11th floor of the hospital there at Great Lakes.
And Charlie, when you went back home to Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
when you got back on the street, if you will,
Yep.
how were you treated?
Very, very well. See, we did not understand that a lot of the Vietnam veterans had come home to anti-war communities, and they were called baby killers, and they were spit on, and they couldn't wear their uniforms, because when we came back, it was sort of the end of the war, and whether you were pro-war or anti-war, you were happy that the POWs came home. So it sort of unified the nation, just the fact that we were coming home, and it was a monumental time in our lives. And I run into many old timers that remember very clearly the day. I see, this is 50 years ago this year that we came home. And I run into people that recognize me from seeing me on TV. So we were treated very well when the POWs came home. They gave us tickets to the World Series. Ford Motor Company gave me a car. And so we were very well treated. I was the first guy back to the Kansas City area. So I was on the front page of the Kansas City Star for, I think, 4 straight weeks. They were interviewing me, and I was on TV and all that stuff, and so it was a wonderful homecoming.
The first person you came in contact with that wire was Bob Shoemaker. Keep the faith, baby, as you mentioned. Did Bob make it home with you?
Certainly did. In fact, he stayed in the military and made admiral. He's a retired two-star admiral. And in fact, I see Bob about every month or two. We have this 50th year is our big reunion at the Nixon Library.
Yorma Linda. Uh-huh.
Exactly. When we came home, President Nixon served the biggest White House dinner to this date. Is the biggest dinner the White House has ever served to the POWs and our what he called first ladies. He knew that a lot of us had been divorced, and so he invited us to bring our first lady. And
that's nice.
Yeah, my mother became a first lady for a day.
That's great.
So we're replicating that it's 50 years to the day, the 24th of May, 50 years to the day. We're replicating that dinner at the Nixon Library in Yorba Linda. And they're going to bring the same, they say, the same china, the same silver that we had 50 years ago.
Wow.
And the same meal, which wasn't all that great.
So, Charlie, when President Nixon spoke to you personally, what did he say to you?
He said, thanks for being there, and proud that he was able to bring us home.
The president who was holding the Oval Office when you were shot down was Lyndon Baines Johnson.
Right.
Did he ever contact you?
No. Nope. Never heard from him.
Did you ever hear from Westmoreland?
No. No. I think those guys pretty much wanted to forget the whole thing. But no, didn't hear from Westmoreland or President Johnson.
Who did you hear from that surprised you?
Good question. A lot of my old friends came out of the woodwork because I was getting so much publicity. I think then they kind of wanted to share in the joy, and that was fun. That was good. Now, I met with my wife at the time for just an hour or two to try to talk her out of the divorce, and but she was because we needed to talk about what happened to the dog and what happened to the house and all that stuff, because I didn't know any of these things. I was totally in the dark about when I left her in San Diego. I was at Miramar in San Diego, and we had purchased a home right there in San Diego, and I left her in there at that house, but she needed to go back to Kansas to her support group, her mom and dad, my mom and dad, and she went back to school in Kansas. So anyway, we needed to talk about all this stuff. She was really staunch that she wanted a divorce, that she needed she had fallen in love with this guy, and so she felt that was the direction she needed to go. And she went her way, I went mine, and I did not hear or know anything about her for 42 years. So I'd go back to our high school reunions, and even her best friends had not heard from her. She just cut out of the pattern. So 42 years later, okay, and now this has been 8 years ago, I get this package in the mail with pictures from the Naval Academy that she had taken. This is black and white pictures of me and my buddies at Annapolis, and but there was no letter from her in there, but there was a letter that my mother had sent to her the day I was shot down. And it was, and I recognized my mom's handwriting, but it was a very prophetic letter. About the third paragraph, she said, "It's such a shame that Charlie has been shot down. He had so much potential for changing the hearts and minds of people, But who knows what God has planned?
Mm-hmm.
This experience may give him even more opportunity to touch people. So that was pretty cool. So I wrote her back and said thanks for that and sorry for what she went through, because see, in a lot of ways the wives had it tougher than we did.
Right.
We knew we were alive every day. They did not.
Right.
We knew we were gonna, we come home and be happy and healthy and mentally stable, and they did not know this at all. And so it was tough, really tough on the wives. So anyway, I finally she called me about a year later and just wanted to talk, and we got along real well. She's still married to the guy, and of course I'm remarried and have 4 kids, 4 grandkids, and live a very happy life. And finally, when I got comfortable with her, I said, when we met there to discuss the divorce, and you were waving that big old diamond ring, and I could never have bought you a diamond ring. You were waving that in my face. I thought I was kind of low class. She said, I was afraid you talked me out of the divorce, and so I wore that diamond ring to give me confidence and strength that I wanted to go through with this. So, but it's all worked out very well, as as a lot of things do in life. You think they're tragic, but I have a wonderful wife and 4 great kids and 4 great grandkids, and live a very, very happy life.
Well, that brings us today, Charlie. And this is why your story and all you went through is so important. Your mother, along with my mom, were probably the 2 wisest women to walk the planet.
Yep.
Charlie, you have changed hearts and minds of people and continue to this day. And I do believe all you went through changes even more hearts and minds when they hear your story. Charlie, many people believe that there's nothing they can do to make the situation better in our country. That people are being treated as though they are captives, prisoners, in some cases prisoners of war. Not to the level that you were tortured, obviously, but still, there's a mental, psychological, and physical side to what's going on with many people believe how they're being treated by their own government. What words of wisdom, Charlie? They can build off of everything you've said today, but what words of wisdom do you give them to Charlie, make lemonade? What do you tell them? Because my dad used to say, listen, out of every bad thing, everything happens for a reason, and it'll always work out for the best. And Charlie, I used to fight him on that to his dying day. But you know what? He's always been right. So what do you tell our listeners?
Well, first of all, I'm a citizen, and I sometimes feel back in the prison myself, with all that goes on, and I ask myself, is there anything that I can do? Mm-hmm. And sometimes I come up pretty short. From my prison experience, and the things I learned there is, first of all, community. Community is vital. Mm-hmm. If you don't have people that you trust, if you don't have family members that love you and you love them, and in the military, and especially in combat situations, if you don't have people that will die for you, and they know that you will die for them, that's a combination tough to beat. And so I guess that'd be my first thought, was keep the faith, baby. Know that if we continue to believe what we believe, and trust in the founding fathers and the Constitution of this country, we'll survive. Now, I'm part of the. I'm being canceled, as you are being canceled. I know that they've tried to stop you, and great messages that you put out, and I really appreciate your speaking, because sometimes sometimes I feel a little guilty in not standing up. But I travel the country. I still speak several times a month, and just in the last 2 weeks, I've spoken in Florida and Texas, and I'll be going back to, I don't know, somewhere in the next week. I can't keep track of it all. Wherever I go, it's really amazing that I find people that think like you do and like I do. That there is a way out of this. Mm-hmm. Now, it may just be the circles I run in, but I don't think so, because I'm talking in the major cities. I live on the West Coast. I live in the People's Republic of California,
right?
But in the communities that I go, it's overwhelming to me, the number of people that really believe that we can persevere, that we can make it through this. And I am very hopeful, obviously. And some of the little things that happen that we see are very encouraging to me. The people that are standing up for the freedoms that we believe in, because it's tough. Of course, I also get a little bit of comfort in thinking that my father, 75 years ago, thought that the world was going to come to an end because of Elvis and rock and roll. And so sometimes I think it may be kind of a generational thing, that, that old graybeards, look back and think you wish for the good old days. But, and also being an optimist myself, I always look for the good news. And we got a lot of good news going on. I mean, if you think about it, and think what our parents and grandparents lived through, we're doing pretty well. We're doing okay. And I think if we continue to fight the good fight and keep the faith, maybe we'll survive.
And that's the key, Charlie. You are the epitome of not just keeping the faith, but taking action. Not sitting on the couch, not bemoaning the situation that you were in or that you might being oppressed about at this point are in. You don't sit there and take it. You do it peacefully, and you do it ethically and honestly and morally, but you stand up. And that's why, Charlie, you are such an inspiration to each and every person who's ever come in contact with you.
Well, that's a very nice comment. I really appreciate that, and I'll throw the bouquet right back at you, because you're really out there on the front line, and I really appreciate you for the organization that you have built and the message that you continue to give to your listeners. You're a good man.
Well, coming from you, Charlie, that's an incredible compliment, and I thank you. Charlie, if folks want to follow your efforts, you have a website. Educate our listeners on how they can follow you on a daily basis.
Sure. My website is pretty simple, charlieplumb.com, CharliePlumb.com, charlieplumb.com. And there are all kinds of videos on there, and all the stuff that I've done over the last 50 years. And, if they're interested in my story, and my autobiography is called I'm No Hero, excuse me, and it's in its 34th printing. So, and of course, I continue to speak all over the country. So I think a pretty guy that's pretty much out there. It's easy to find. You look on YouTube, Charlie Plumb, and there must be 30 or 40 videos. Some I'm not too happy about, but they're there. So,
well, we're going to put this out there as well, Charlie. Charlie, I thank you for everything you have done, are doing, and will do. And my dad's favorite comment was dream big and dare to fail. Not dream big and dare to win, because as he said, if you just try to dare to win, you don't leave it all on the field.
That's very true.
But if you dare to fail, you'll leave it all on the field. And Charlie, I'd like to thank you. You are truly the epitome of dreaming big, even in times of terror, dreaming big and daring to fail, and in the process, having an incredibly positive impact on everyone and anyone you touch. And I thank you.
Very nice of you to say, Doctor, and I really appreciate that.
Well, we appreciate you, Charlie, and all that you've been through and all that you continue to do. And I thank you folks for joining us today. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Dream big and dare to fail. And let's add another one. Keep the faith, baby. Until next time, Dave Janda signing off. Thanks for joining us today.